Hi, Acadiana. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Monday to you. It's November the 11th. This is Let's Talk Tropics, and we're starting the day without a named storm in the Atlantic Basin, which is a nice change, but that might be changing. And my apologies last week for thinking that the next name on the list was Sebastian. That's actually for next year. As I was sitting on the couch on Friday, I was like, how could the next name be Sebastian when we're working with Rafael when we go man, woman on the names? So yeah, I was looking at the wrong list. So for all of the times in the last, and it wasn't just for one day, it was like on for about a week and a half or something, I kept thinking for some reason the next name on the list was going to be Sebastian. But the next one is Sara, and we are watching an area that could possibly become a tropical storm Sara here coming up in the next several days. So let's get started right now. We're finally starting to see the clouds breaking up. We had the low clouds and fog for most of the morning, but now things are starting to break up. We've got a nice breeze out there, temperature 79. So it's not terrible out there for the afternoon, but by November standards, we are still way above normal. Our highs should be only in the lower 70s, and our nighttime temperature should easily be dropping back into the 40s and 50s, and we haven't seen any of that. But we'll probably see closer to normal temperatures toward the end of the week. And as we look at some of these extended computer models for the tropics, I'm also going to point out that a lot of these are indicating a pretty deep trough coming in here in about maybe 10 to 12 days or so down the road, where we could really finally start to see some cold temperatures, not just cool temperatures, but maybe some cold temperatures as we go through the next several days. So looking outside, we can see that there's a pretty large area of high pressure that's off to our northwest, and there's another trough that's starting to come onto the west coast. And of course, if you look there in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico, that bit of a swirl there is what's left of what was Rafael, the National Hurricane Center, ending the advisories yesterday as it became a non-tropical low, but the little swirl is still kind of meandering out there, and that's causing some rough seas and some bigger waves there right along the coast. But eventually that is going to continue to weaken. But some of the moisture that's out there is probably going to get pulled into this next trough. There's a cold front that's going to come through on Wednesday and bring us a pretty good chance for some rain. And some of that moisture is going to get pulled into that. But eventually, everything that is remnant of Rafael is going to get swept away by that front and quickly moved on out and away. So looking at our cameras here, we're starting to see the peaks of sunshine. So the clouds will continue to very slowly break up as we go into the afternoon hours. Looks like there's a little bit more sunshine a little farther to the east over toward Butte, LaRose, and Henderson, while still we've got some cloud cover here in the Lafayette local region. But everybody should be able to get back to at least partly sunny skies. But I think many of you will see mostly sunny skies before the day is over. So again, there's a quick look at the Gulf of Mexico and what's left of Rafael, which was very unusual to see a major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico during the month of November. We are very fortunate, though, that there was a ton of wind shear in the northern sections and the western sections of the Gulf. So really, no matter where it went, it was going to meet its demise with the drier air as well as the increased wind shear. So this really got torn apart. So it kind of danced around. Cuba was the only landfall as it moved across that western tip of Cuba and then kind of stayed out in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. But as I said, the Gulf waters, especially far offshore, are still a bit on the rough side, and we've got a small craft advisory that ends at 3 o'clock for the far offshore waters. Near shore waters still a little bit on the rough side, and you might be rocking and rolling a little bit out there on some of our platforms that are out in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. And looking at the tropical Atlantic, we've got a pretty good cold front here that's across the middle part of the Atlantic, and that kind of winds its way down here into the northern part of the Caribbean Sea. And there's a little bit of a low pressure area, a little bit of disturbed weather right there that's going to be kind of drifting its way off toward the west. And at the same time, the Central American Gyre is going to start to kind of work its magic once again. And we could see another low pressure area kind of developing in this particular area, very similar similar to many of our tropical systems that we've seen over the course of the hurricane season, especially since September. And that Central American Gyre is something that's a little more it's a little more visible during the early part of the hurricane season, say May, June, and then getting into the latter part of the hurricane season, October, November. But it has been pretty active over the course of the hurricane season this time around. But the area that we're currently watching is actually right about in here. You see this little blow up of some thunderstorms here just south of Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. So it's the kind of the tail end of a front, and there's a little bit of a low pressure area that's trying to develop, and this is going to be scooting its way off toward the west. So it could get wound up a little bit more by the Central American Gyre, and the National Hurricane Center is currently watching for more of a broad area of low pressure to develop over the western Caribbean. Looks like we got a little bit of a low level circulation of something left over from a while back, but the area that we're going to watch here is going to be generally south of Jamaica, about the same place where Rafael got its start and so many other tropical systems so far this year. So there's your outlook from the National Hurricane Center for the next 7 days. So the area of disturbed weather, again, is south of the Dominican Republic and will be shifting off toward the west. But a combination of a number of things and a lot of moisture that's going to be building, a lot of moisture that's already there along the Panamanian and the Costa Rican coast, the Colombian coast as well. All of that is going to come together. And last week when we left you, there were a couple of models that were already trying to stir something up over the western part of the Caribbean. So that's kind of what we're looking at now. So what we're going to do is we'll go through the four major global models. And again, we're going to take these out to 10 days with the exception of the icon because it only goes out 7. But you can see that the GFS has a pretty solid low pressure area spinning up here. This is going into Monday of next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday of next week. There's that deep trough that comes across the middle part of the country. And anything that would develop according to the GFS in that particular area would get swept away. But it looks like formation of any of this probably won't start to get going until maybe Thursday at the earliest, but more likely as we head into the weekend. But it is spinning up a fairly significant system there through the Gulf of Honduras and then kind of cruising its way not far from where Rafael made landfall there over the western tip of Cuba, but rather than it kind of rolling into the central part of the Gulf, you've got that deep trough that kind of sweeps in right about there, and it picks it up and kind of slides it off to the east. So there's a possibility, according to this model, that South Florida would need to be concerned about this. But remember, this is a 10-day forecast, so there are going to be a lot of changes between now and the middle part of next week. So let's move on to the Euro. The Euro, of course, has what's left of Rafael just kind of being absorbed and lifting up ahead of that front. But then you see that low start to develop over the western part of the Caribbean. That's Friday, that's Saturday, and then there's Sunday. And notice it's a lot farther to the south, and it just kind of meanders there before starting to make a move toward the north. And it is very similar to what the GFS shows, but it is a little bit slower, where the GFS brings a system closer to the southern tip of Florida on about Monday or Tuesday of next week. The Euro model kind of holds off until about Wednesday of next week. But it's also indicating a pretty strong trough here coming in from the west, and with an indication of maybe some very cold air that could be coming down. Could we finally start to feel more like winter as we go into the middle and latter part of next week? So that's kind of the suggestion both on the GFS as well as the Euro, but the Euro kind of stalls a little bit down to the south, and then again you get that little turn there that maybe moves through the Straits of Florida or could possibly touch the southern tip of Florida. So let's move on to the Canadian model, and I will say that all the first two are pretty well in agreement other than a little bit of timing back and forth, but even the Canadian model has a low develop. Not nearly as strong, but look at it kind of getting sucked into that trough in those last few days there. So as we go into Friday of this week, you get some development there around Central America, but the Canadian model kind of keeps it over land. So you get a weaker system, but notice how it lifts into the central and western part of the Gulf of Mexico. So a considerably different track than the first two models. And the icon, which only goes out 7 days, but you can see that low pressure area now starting to brew there. That's into Thursday of this week. There's about Friday, and then getting into the weekend, you see it kind of start to pull a little bit farther toward the north, but then we run out of the days here. But you could also see that trough that's kind of whipping across the deep south and into Louisiana there on that last frame. So that, again, would indicate some much colder air coming down for us. So at this point, 3 of the 4 models are going to be sweeping, kind of developing this at the end of this week, lifting it northward and then sweeping it eastward with that very strong trough as we go in the next several days. So I'm just going to take you out to Saturday because that's where we've got a lot of the agreement that we will see something developing there. So that's the GFS model, and that's probably showing a tropical storm, maybe borderline hurricane. The Euro also in a very similar place. There you go, back and forth. Again, this is the same time period, 2 different models, but both of them have a tropical system. We would call that Sara there over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. So there's your back and forth on the same day. Canadian model, remember, was staying over land a little bit more, but based on the other 2, it's kind of in the ballpark. So you do have some agreement here between now and day 5 to 6, which is going out into Saturday. And the Icon model also has a low pressure area, although a little bit weaker than the GFS and the Euro. But you can see that there's the GFS, there's the Euro, there's the Canadian, and there's the Icon. So at least going out for the first 5 to 6 days, 4 of our global models are all indicating that there's going to be some kind of a deepening low pressure area, while the GFS, the Euro, and the Icon are all indicating a closed tropical system. But again, I wanted to just kind of show you there that far last frame. I'm just going with the GFS because not only are we watching tropics, but I know there's a lot of us here in Louisiana that would like to see some cold weather. So just to kind of bring that up here at the very end, you get this very deep trough, and you see some of those bluer lines. You're seeing 534 and 540. That's decameters, and that is the heights. And during the summertime, those heights are in the 590, 596, somewhere in that range. That was when you really get hot. But the 540 line is considered the rain-snow line. Now, I don't see any snow or anything like that coming in, but it is exciting to see those heights lower that much. That would be an indication of some much colder temperatures trending perhaps toward the middle part of next week. So it's hot out there now. Just give it a week to 10 days, and I think we're going to finally start to see some changes. But going back to the tropical system and where it would be developing, again, those waters in the Western Caribbean are still plenty warm to support any tropical systems, and the tropical cyclone heat potential is quite high there. It's quite low, though, over the Gulf of Mexico. So if anything does lift northward, it's most likely going to be weakening. Not only will be dealing with shear, but also be dealing with some colder water temperatures. But if the tropical system, if it develops here over the western part of the Caribbean, it's got a pretty good chance of sustaining itself and even strengthening, because it would be going over such warm waters and such high tropical cyclone heat potential. If it curves and goes in this particular direction toward Florida and then out into the Atlantic, it would still have a chance for some development there over the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico as well as the Florida Keys. So if it's going to be anything strong, it's going to have to turn toward the east, because if it turns toward the west, it's going to run into much colder waters, and if it turns toward the north, it's going to be running into a lot of wind shear. So wind shear is not a big problem right now over the central part of the Caribbean Sea. So you look right about in there. And that's where that little disturbance is kind of trying to get going here south of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And if it kind of drifts off toward the west, next couple of days, the wind shear is relatively low. As we go into early next week, we are still going to be seeing the possibility of some higher wind shear that's going to be in that particular area. But if it moves off toward the west, we're probably going to be seeing a little bit more wind shear. So just like what we saw with tropical storm, or rather hurricane Rafael, there's a pretty good possibility that we're going to be seeing some stronger wind shear. And there's actually a lot more wind shear than what this map is showing, because I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea here. I'm going to change it up to get the latest model, because I'm just noticing that the latest model is not there. So there is where the latest model is. So that is valid for Saturday. So you can see there's quite a bit of wind shear over much of the Gulf of Mexico and the northern part of the Caribbean. But where anything would try to develop there near the coast of Nicaragua, Honduras, it's got a little window of opportunity where we could see some lower than average wind shear. Meanwhile, the global tropics hazard outlook, remember this is our week 2, week 3, so we show you the next 7 days when it comes to the 7-day graphical outlook from the National Hurricane Center. And the global tropics hazard outlook goes out the next week and then the following week. But this is going out starting November 13th, which is the day after tomorrow. We are going to get another update on this, but at least last week's version is showing above average activity possible over the Western Caribbean as well as the Western Atlantic. And I wouldn't be surprised to see if when this updates on Tuesday that we'll see pretty much the same. And also that third week is going to be pushing our way into the first part of December. So will we have some post-season tropical systems? Every once in a while we get a preseason one in April or May, and sometimes we get some that develop in November and roll into December, but it's not that unusual, or it's pretty unusual rather, to see one actually develop during the month of December. So could hurricane season kind of drag on for a little bit longer? Of course, those areas where you're seeing that higher tropical hazard outlook is also the same places where you would normally see development and tracks of tropical storms and hurricanes during the month of November. Most of the time, if they develop over the western part of the Caribbean, they tend to turn more toward the northeast, toward Cuba, Florida, the Bahamas. So Rafael was a pretty unusual track, and then having it getting torn apart, which was great news for us and much of the folks along the Gulf of Mexico. But you can still see tropical systems and hurricanes going into the mid and latter part of November and even into the early part of December. So even though hurricane season officially ends on November 30th, we may be still talking about a named storm or possibly two before hurricane season really ends sometime later on this year. So Sara is the next name on the list, and I wouldn't be surprised if we're forecasting with a named storm called Sara coming up here in the next week to about 7 or 8 days or so. So watch out for that and just stay with us for the rest of the week. I don't think we're going to have to worry about it, but it's just kind of fun to watch and amazing that we've got these tropical systems that are continuing this late in the season. Of course, like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. And don't forget, you can hear my weather forecast locally here on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. In between any of the broadcasts, please visit my social media pages, both on Facebook and X. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. I hope you have a great start to your week, and I will see you on Tuesday. Have a good one.